April 1943, the South Pacific. 16 American fighters skim the ocean at 50 feet, flying blind for over 400 miles to intercept a single Japanese bomber carrying the architect of Pearl Harbor. Only one aircraft in the entire Army Air Forces has the range, the speed, and the twin engines to survive a mission this reckless. It is called the Lightning, and in Europe, the same year, pilots are dying in it for entirely different reasons. In February 1937, the United States Army Air Corps issued Circular Proposal X-608. The military wanted a specialized high-altitude interceptor designed to hunt down modern bombers before they reached their targets. The document laid out performance goals that shocked the aviation industry: a maximum speed of at least 360 miles per hour at 20,000 feet, and a full throttle endurance of 1 hour at that same altitude. Most challenging of all was the rate of climb. The Air Corps demanded that the new aircraft reach 20,000 feet within 6 minutes of leaving the ground. To the engineers of 1937, these figures represented an almost insurmountable barrier. Standard single-engine fighters of the era, such as the early P-40, struggled to exceed 300 miles per hour, and their climb to high altitudes was measured in tens of minutes. The fundamental limitation was power. The most advanced American inline engine available, the Allison 51710, could generate about 1,000 horsepower at sea level, but that output deteriorated rapidly in the thin air above 15,000 feet. Compressing the thin air at high altitudes required heavy, complex superchargers that choked the limited space inside a traditional fighter nose. Adding this weight to a single-engine aircraft meant sacrificing speed, which defeated the entire purpose of the interceptor. No single engine in existence could pull a traditional airframe to 360 miles per hour at high altitude while carrying the heavy armament and fuel required for combat. Faced with these physics, most established aviation companies declined to submit proposals, viewing specification X-608 as a recipe for financial ruin. In Burbank, California, Lockheed chose a different path. At the time, Lockheed was a relatively small manufacturer known for civilian transports with little experience in military design. Yet, the leadership in Burbank decided to embrace the immense technical risk. They set out to solve the power deficit by rethinking the basic architecture of the fighter rather than waiting for a future engine. This decision set in motion the creation of a machine whose legacy would ultimately divide the aviation world, an aircraft that would struggle to survive the freezing skies over Europe, but would go on to become the deadliest American fighter the Pacific had ever seen. Clarence Leonard Kelly Johnson approached the problem not as a stylist, but as a mathematical realist. Born on February 27, 1910, in the mining town of Ishpeming, Michigan, Johnson developed an early obsession with flight that carried him to the University of Michigan. There, he earned his bachelor's degree in 1933 and a master's degree in 1935, focusing his research on aerodynamic stability. When he first arrived at Lockheed in 1933, the cash-strapped company hired him as a tool designer and draftsman for $83 a month. But Johnson's talent for identifying aerodynamic flaws quickly caught the attention of Chief Engineer Hall Hibbard. Hibbard was building a design team that favored radical innovation over conservative imitation, and he gave the young engineer the freedom to challenge conventional aviation layouts. To meet the Army's demanding specification, Johnson and Hibbard realized that a single engine was structurally insufficient. They needed two, but placing two engines on a traditional fighter wing created massive drag and dangerous twisting forces known as torque. Their solution was an unconventional, highly efficient shape, a twin-boom configuration wrapped around a central crew pod. This layout was entirely driven by engineering utility. The long, hollow booms behind the engines provided the perfect housing for the bulky General Electric turbo superchargers and their ducting, keeping the main wing thin and aerodynamically clean. In a traditional single-engine fighter, the propeller and engine block occupied the nose, forcing designers to scatter machine guns across the wings where their bullets sprayed in a converging pattern. By moving the engines to the booms, Johnson freed the central pod's nose for a tightly clustered battery of 450 caliber machine guns and a heavy 20mm cannon. This concentrated firepower fired straight ahead, eliminating the need for harmonization and delivering a devastating stream of lead. To stabilize the aircraft at high speeds, the engines spun their propellers in opposite directions. These counter-rotating propellers canceled out the torque that made single-engine fighters pull violently to one side during takeoff and hard maneuvering. This radical geometry was not designed for aesthetic appeal, but as a calculated mechanism to conquer the high altitudes of a coming war. On June 23, 1937, the Army Air Corps officially authorized Lockheed to turn its theoretical Model 22 paper design into a physical prototype. Under the designation XP-38, construction began on serial number 37457 inside a highly secured area of the Burbank factory. For 18 months, Lockheed's manufacturing team worked to realize Kelly Johnson's radical blueprints. To handle the unprecedented structural loads of twin-engine flight, the team utilized butt-joined, flush-riveted skin panels to create an exceptionally smooth aerodynamic surface, pushing the company's production capabilities to the limit. The completed prototype was delivered to the military on New Year's Day, 1939. This twin-boom machine did not look like any fighter that had flown before. It was massive, complex, and entirely unproven. The task of testing it fell to Lieutenant Benjamin Kelsey, a skilled military pilot who had helped draft the original high-altitude interceptor specification. On January 27, 1939, Kelsey climbed into the central nacelle at March Field, California, for the aircraft's maiden flight. He fired up the twin Allison engines, taxiing the heavy airframe toward the runway. When Kelsey pushed the throttles forward, the counter-rotating propellers grabbed the air, canceling out the torque that normally pulled twin-engine aircraft offline during takeoff. The XP-38 lifted off, climbing rapidly into the California sky. Though the flight lasted only 20 minutes and ended in an emergency landing due to failing flap support rods, Kelsey had proved the concept. The radical layout was no longer just a drawing. It was an airborne reality, capable of speeds that would soon rewrite the rules of military aviation. On February 11, 1939, 15 days after the maiden flight, Lieutenant Benjamin Kelsey climbed back into the XP-38 for a transcontinental speed record attempt. The military wanted to prove the interceptor's strategic capability over extreme distances. Kelsey roared out of March Field, California, refueled at Wright Field, Ohio, and raced toward Long Island. He crossed the continent in 7 hours and 48 minutes, but the final approach ended in disaster. The experimental Allison engines failed to respond to throttle inputs, choked by a fuel pump malfunction. The prototype clipped trees and crashed on the Coldstream Golf Course near Mitchell Field. The impact destroyed the only XP-38 in existence. Kelsey walked away uninjured, but Lockheed's sole physical asset was gone. For a small manufacturer risking its survival on a radical design, this loss could have ended the program. Yet the military focused on the data. Kelsey's sprint had proved the aircraft's immense speed. Instead of abandoning the project, the Army Air Corps committed to Kelly Johnson's twin-engine architecture. On April 27, 1939, the military ordered 13 YP-38 service test aircraft under Contract 380101. Lockheed went from possessing one ruined prototype to manufacturing a pre-production fleet. The crash proved the program was risky, but the potential of the twin-boom interceptor was too valuable to ignore. The physics of high-altitude flight in the late 1930s held a hidden trap, one that neither wind tunnels nor mathematical models had fully anticipated. As the P-38 entered service, pilots began pushing the clean, twin-boom airframe into steep dives from altitudes above 25,000 feet. At these heights in the thin, freezing air, the aircraft accelerated with terrifying ease. But as the speed surged, the flight characteristics underwent a sudden, violent transformation. As the aircraft accelerated, the air rushing over the highly curved upper surface of the wing reached the speed of sound, even though the plane itself was traveling far slower. This mismatch created a local shock wave at an aerodynamic boundary around Mach 0.68. This shock wave disrupted the clean airflow, causing the lift on the wing to collapse while the center of pressure drifted rapidly backward. The immediate consequence was a phenomenon known as tuck under. The nose of the heavy fighter pitched down violently into an even steeper dive, while the air flowing behind the wing became so turbulent that it completely bypassed the horizontal tailplane. The elevator, the pilot's only tool for pulling the nose up, went entirely dead. Without a functioning control surface at the rear, the pilot was merely a passenger in a supersonic descent. What began as a tactical maneuver became an instant control emergency. In a matter of seconds, the controls locked solid, turning the cockpit into a physical trap. Pulling back on the steering column did nothing. While the pilot could exert dozens of pounds of manual force on the controls, the aerodynamic load pinning the elevators required thousands to overcome. The airframe began to vibrate with a violence that threatened to tear the twin booms from the wing center section. This invisible wall claimed its first victim on July 23, 1941. Lieutenant Guy L. Putnam was flying a pre-production YP-38 when his aircraft entered an unrecoverable dive, plunging into the ground near Wright Field. Less than 4 months later, On November 4, 1941, disaster struck closer to home. Ralph Burwell Verdon, Lockheed's highly respected chief test pilot, took off from Burbank in YP-38, serial number 39689, to systematically evaluate the dive issue. Verdon was not an inexperienced novice. He was a master airman who spent his days teaching other pilots how to handle the Lightning's quirks. He climbed to 30,000 feet, pushed the nose down, and never recovered. The aircraft disintegrated in midair over Glendale, California. 2 elite pilots were dead. Lockheed's masterpiece was killing its own. Kelly Johnson refused to study the crisis from the safety of a drawing board. On December 31, 1942, he squeezed into a cramped space behind Chief Test Pilot Milo Burcham in a modified Lightning. Burcham climbed to 35,000 feet and plunged the heavy fighter into a 55-degree dive. As the speed surged, the violent tail shake returned. Slipped into the transonic zone, the air rushed over the wings near the speed of sound, freezing the controls. From the rear seat, Johnson watched the physics of compressibility unfold, feeling the aerodynamic lockup firsthand. The flight gave Johnson the physical data he needed to design a cure. His team developed dive recovery flaps, small electrically operated panels mounted on the lower surface of the outer wings. When deployed, the flaps altered the wing's curvature, shifting the center of lift forward to force the nose up, restoring elevator control while adding drag to slow the descent. But solving the engineering puzzle did not guarantee an immediate rescue. Tooling changes required pausing the active assembly lines in Burbank, and the War Department refused to interrupt the flow of fighters. Priority was given to aircraft like the P-51 Mustang, meaning the factory did not integrate the dive recovery flaps into standard production until June 1944. The 14-month delay carried a devastating price. While assembly lines turned out unaltered airframes to keep up with frontline quotas, pilots faced the dangerous pitch down without protection. During those 14 months, approximately 150 P-38s, representing nearly 1% of the entire production run, were lost in compressibility-related crashes. 150 aircraft, and the pilots flying them, were lost to the cold calculus of wartime production. If you enjoy deeply researched aviation and engineering documentaries, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. In the spring of 1943, the skies over Germany became a slaughterhouse. Bomber loss rates without adequate escort reached nearly 20% per mission, meaning that for every 5 heavy bombers that flew into enemy territory, 1 did not return. At that rate of attrition, a crewman's chance of completing a 25-mission tour was statistically impossible. The P-38 Lightning's deployment in September 1943 offered the first hope of a long-range protective screen. However, the European theater immediately subjected the twin-engine fighter to a brutal environmental and tactical trial that exposed its design limitations. At 40,000 feet, the air temperature regularly plunged to -30 degrees Fahrenheit. In this freezing thin air, the P-38's distinctive cockpit became a virtual icebox. Early models routed hot air from only the right-hand Allison engine, leaving the left side of the cabin entirely unheated. When pilots pulled back their throttles during long escort glides, the engine heat dropped to near zero. Pilots like Captain John Red McGowan filed reports of cabin temperatures dropping to 30 below zero, causing faceplates and flight gloves to freeze. This single-engine heat limitation caused severe pilot frostbite and rapid instrument icing, blinding crews in the middle of active combat zones. Tactically, the high-altitude environment stripped the Lightning of its agility against the Luftwaffe's premier interceptors. At 30,000 feet, the P-38's roll rate was limited to 60 degrees per second, while the Focke-Wulf FW-190 rolled at 68 degrees and the Messerschmitt Bf-109 rolled at 72. This difference allowed German pilots to easily roll out of the Lightning's straight-line trajectory. At the same time, dive control limitations became a severe combat handicap. When P-38 pilots attempted to dive to escape or pursue, they ran directly into the wall of compressibility. Because early models lacked dive recovery flaps, a high-speed descent meant risking a fatal mock tuck, forcing American pilots to pull back while German fighters dove away safely. This combination of freezing cabins, restricted roll rates, and dive limitations turned the P-38 into a vulnerable target over Europe. The long-range escort problem was not fully solved until P-51 Mustangs arrived in large numbers in early 1944, providing the agile performance needed to secure the skies. Europe had punished the aircraft in the exact environment where its specific engineering weaknesses mattered most. A popular belief persists that the Lockheed P-38 Lightning was simply an unsuccessful fighter design. an over-engineered machine that failed to meet the demands of modern air combat. This assessment is incorrect. The technical crises that plagued the aircraft were not the result of a flawed layout, but the consequence of a specific, hostile environment. The freezing temperatures and extreme altitudes of northern Europe exposed weaknesses in the cockpit heater and the engine systems, but these difficulties represented localized environmental issues rather than a fundamental design failure. The airframe itself was aerodynamically advanced and structurally sound. It simply ran into physical limits imposed by the European climate. When the aircraft deployed to the Pacific, the physical parameters of combat changed completely. Air battles in the Pacific theater rarely occurred above 20,000 feet, shifting the air war into a lower, warmer band of the atmosphere. In this environment, the sub-zero cold that paralyzed pilots over Germany did not exist. Cockpit heating failures, frozen windshields, and numb fingers ceased to be factors in operational readiness or combat performance. Without the burden of extreme altitude, the twin Allison engines ran smoothly, free from the oil cooling and intercooler issues that had plagued them in the European skies. The twin-engine configuration, which struggled under the atmospheric pressures and icing of high-altitude Europe, operated reliably in the warmer tropical air. The Lightning's combat reputation was ultimately determined by the climate of the theater rather than the airframe itself. The same aircraft that struggled to survive the freezing skies over Europe became the deadliest American fighter the Pacific had ever seen. Major Richard Bong secured his place as America's leading ace of aces by claiming 40 aerial victories, every single one of them achieved from the cockpit of a P-38. While single-engine fighters struggled with range over the vast ocean, Bong used the twin-engine design to dominate the Southwest Pacific. Right behind him was Major Thomas Maguire, who recorded 38 victories before his death in January 1945. Maguire perfected high-energy tactics, diving on targets and using the instant thrust of twin engines to climb back to safety. Together, these two men led an elite group of pilots. The top-scoring American aces of the entire Pacific conflict achieved their records in the Lightning. While a typical single-engine fighter of the era carried less than 300 gallons of fuel, a P-38 equipped with external tanks carried over 600, doubling its operational reach and allowing pilots to hunt deep behind enemy lines. While other aircraft split their victories across multiple theaters, the P-38 concentrated its lethality where the distances were greatest. This extreme long-range capability was put to its ultimate test on April 18, 1943, during Operation Vengeance. United States intelligence intercepted the travel itinerary of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the strategic architect of the Pearl Harbor attack. To exploit this opportunity, the military needed a fighter that could fly a precise, long-range ambush mission without being detected. No single-engine American fighter possessed the range to reach the interception point and return. The mission fell to 16 P-38G Lightnings of the 339th Fighter Squadron, led by Major John Mitchell. The pilots flew a precise flight path of more than 400 miles at wave-top height, skimming just 30 feet above the water to avoid Japanese radar networks. This required absolute navigational precision, relying entirely on compass headings, airspeed calculations, and flight time. They arrived at the target area near Bougainville exactly on schedule, intercepting the two Japanese bombers carrying Yamamoto and his staff. Within minutes, the P-38 struck, sending the Admiral's transport down into the jungle. It remains one of the most daring and significant long-range fighter operations in military history, accomplished at a distance of nearly 1,000 miles round trip, a feat that would have left any other Allied fighter dry of fuel. The performance contrast between the two halves of the globe was stark. In the European sky, the P-38 had been hindered by extreme altitude and freezing temperatures that disabled systems and isolated pilots. In the Pacific, the aircraft operated in its sweet spot, turning those early engineering vulnerabilities into unmatched tactical advantages. The twin engines that suffered from high-altitude icing over Germany provided essential safety over thousands of miles of open water, ensuring that an engine failure meant a long flight home rather than a fatal plunge into the sea. While the 8th Air Force in Europe began phasing out the Lightning in favor of more agile, high-altitude single-engine escorts, the 5th and 13th Air Forces in the Pacific demanded every airframe Lockheed could produce. Ultimately, the very machine that struggled to withstand the icy conditions of the Western Front transformed into the most lethal weapon in the Pacific theater. When the final tallies of World War II were assembled, the hard data of industrial production and aerial combat settled the debate. Lockheed delivered the first production P-38D in July 1941, months before the attack on Pearl Harbor, and the final airframe rolled off the assembly line on August 30, 1945. While every other Army Air Forces fighter either entered the conflict after the war began or saw its production line close before the end, the Lightning remained in continuous manufacture from the first day of American involvement to the last. This uninterrupted run yielded 10,038 airframes, a force that reshaped the air war. In the Pacific, where vast distances swallowed single-engine aircraft, P-38 pilots claimed 1,857 aerial victories. This total surpassed the Pacific record of any other single-engine Army fighter, proving that the twin-engine layout was an unmatched asset when operating over the open ocean. These numbers reveal a striking truth about the machine's legacy. In the skies over Germany, early mechanical struggles led commanders to replace the Lightning with more agile escorts. But in the skies over the Pacific, those same engines provided the long-range reliability required to dismantle an empire. The cold data of the war confirms a historical reality. The very design that faced disaster in the frozen skies of Europe stood as the ultimate instrument of victory in the warm air of the Pacific. One machine, built by the same hands, left behind two completely opposite reputations. As the fires of World War II receded, Clarence Kelly Johnson did not look backward. He took the hard-won lessons of the P-38's development and the grueling battles with high-speed compressibility, the need for rapid field testing, and the absolute necessity of bypassing rigid bureaucracy, and used them to forge a new way of building aircraft. In 1943, he had already established a highly secure, small-team division within Lockheed that would officially become the Advanced Development Programs, famously known as the Skunk Works. At Skunk Works, Johnson codified 14 basic management rules, prioritizing direct communication and engineering autonomy over corporate red tape. The radical thinking that birthed the twin-boom Lightning soon defined a new era of American air power. Johnson went on to design the high-altitude U-2 reconnaissance plane, directly applying the lessons of pressurized cockpits and extreme altitudes that had once frozen his pilots over Germany. He then pushed the boundaries of speed and metallurgy to shape the legendary SR-71 Blackbird, conquering the same thermal and aerodynamic shockwaves that had once threatened to tear early P-38 prototypes apart. Today, only 9 airworthy P-38 Lightnings remain in existence, their distinctive twin-boom silhouettes instantly recognizable as they roar across modern airshows. Yet the true legacy of the aircraft lives on in the very structure of aerospace engineering. The engineer who built a fighter both feared and doubted went on to build machines no enemy could even see coming. Subscribe to the channel for more aviation history. Today, Kelly Johnson's philosophy of rapid adaptation still defines modern aerospace engineering. The P-38 proved that a weapon's true value lies not in its flaws, but in where and how we deploy it. The engineer who built a fighter both feared and doubted went on to build machines no enemy could even see coming. Subscribe for more deep dives into military aviation history.